Welcome to the Ground Jewels. My name's James Dixon, and thank you so much for joining us this week. This week we're going to talk to Matt Zarb-Cousin. He's a campaigner around gambling reform, and he's going to talk about his childhood love of Southend United, and of course that means for us, we're talking about the fabulous Roots Hall. It's a really interesting chat, and I'm obviously thankful for Matt for joining us. But before that, I just wanted to touch on my trip last week to Scotland. I think I mentioned I was at Rafe Rovers in the last podcast. I did a wonderful tour of Ibrox, and I've got a great guest coming up in a few weeks' time to talk Ibrox. Rangers football, the people associated with Rangers Football Club, just thank you. It's a fantastic stadium, and the tour was so well organised. Some of these stadium tours can be a little bit, but this was fantastic. Obviously, lots and lots of history there on the Ibrox site and with the main stand, and we'll cover that all in the episode. But it's just such a lovely, fantastic hospitality. Really can't thank them enough. I also managed to get to the West of Scotland cricket ground, where the first international was played in 1872. That was nice to tick off the list. And I also went to Hampden Park to watch Queen's Park play Greenock Morton. Possibly the worst game of football I've ever seen, to be honest. But it was nice to watch a Scottish Championship game from inside Hampden. It was a bit weird, but I think that's sort of a quirky thing to do. It was fine. It was fine. It was just nice to be in Glasgow, to be honest. A wonderful, wonderful city. And before we get to Matt, as always, we've got some news from around the grounds, and two grounds really have been dominating the discussion this week. The ongoing saga around Old Trafford and Jim Ratcliffe's plans for Old Trafford. This week suggesting that they wanted taxpayers' money to help build a new Wembley of the North. Call me old-fashioned, but I think Jim Ratcliffe should be a UK taxpayer before he asks for UK taxpayers' money to fund his club stadium. That's just that's a point of view I have, and it's quite American, isn't it? Asking for clubs looking for public money to fund stadia. Manchester already has one publicly funded and publicly owned stadium, the Etihad. Manchester City don't own it; they lease it from the council. So I don't know that they need another. Jim Ratcliffe himself stopped being a UK taxpayer a long time ago. Maybe Monaco would like to help you pay for your stadium in Manchester, Jim. Just think about that. And the other stadium that's been in the news this week is Twickenham, because it became public knowledge that the RFU considered selling Twickenham and buying a 50% stake in Wembley. Now, Twickenham has a lot of problems. You would never put that size of rugby ground there in an area of London that is not particularly well served by, certainly not served at all by the tube network, but not particularly well served by transport. And so I understand the rationale for the RFU looking away from it. I don't think it's a top-tier stadium. Certainly by London standards, you've got things like Tottenham, you've got even the Emirates, Wembley, London Stadium itself, that you would potentially look to before Twickenham for putting on a major event. So I get it, but obviously quite pleased from a historical point of view that the RFU aren't going ahead. Twickenham's been the home of English rugby for over 100 years. There's lots of history and lots of heritage on that cabbage patch. So pleased that they're trying to do something with that. Actually got a really interesting episode coming up in a couple of weeks' time about rugby in the southwest of London, but it's not Twickenham we're going to be looking at. It's going to be Old Deer Park, the home of London Welsh. And previously before that, the home of Richmond and London Scottish and Rosslyn Park. So one of the great club rugby grounds of London. So that'll be really interesting in a couple of weeks. But now we're going to go over from southwest London to Essex. We're going to talk Roots Hall with Matt Zarb-Cousin.
It's Eastwood this time! Oh, what a goal! Rashford has given Southend the lead with a goal that any Manchester United player would be proud to score.
Welcome to the Ground Jewels, Matt Zarb-Cousin. Welcome, Matt. We're here today to talk about Roots Hall, which is a sort of classic Football League ground. Obviously, the home of Southend United. I say Football League ground because obviously now it's presently it's a National League ground. But I imagine when you began supporting them, that they were very much firmly entrenched in the Football League.
They were in the 90s. So my first game was when I was 6. I went to watch the Southend Wolves, and it finished 1-1. And it was very much a sort of mid-table championship team, or what was then Division 1, and had some really, really good players as well. Mike Marsh I think he played for Liverpool previously. There was some other, as a striker, I think Andy Rammell. There was a lot of good players, and they had quite an iconic kit as well at the time, which was like a star, yellow star, a giant one in the middle of a shirt, and it was blue and yellow. It was very striking,
like I guess in that sort of era, sort of a little bit like Dortmund, a little maybe like the Juventus away kit, which they win the Champions League in '96. Is that the sort of kit that we're thinking about?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's a similar sort of I mean the Roots Hall it's an old ground, but you're very, very close to the pitch. And I do remember reading in the last, when we were in the Championship last time, that the ground generates the most noise of any ground in the Football League. It is a very, very loud environment, and when it's full, when that ground is full, which hasn't happened for a while, unfortunately, the atmosphere is fantastic. And but I mean, I remember when I started going in the 90s, and it felt like the ground needed a bit of a lick of paint then, and nothing really has changed since. It's just got worse.
So this ground that we're talking about, Roots Hall, it's 12,000 capacity in a modern sense. The record attendance is 31,000. It was set during an FA Cup tie with Liverpool in the late 70s, and as you say, a sort of unloved ground. And we might get on to talking about Ron Martin, his ownership, and his attempts to sell the ground to Sainsbury's. But I guess it's been attractive to somebody like Sainsbury's because it's right in the centre of the town there. Presumably, when you're younger, this is a ground that you're sort of approaching on foot. You're parking up in one of the side streets. Describe the area to us as well as the ground.
So it's closest to an area called Prittlewell, which is one stop on the train from Southend Victoria, which Southend Victoria is the centre of town, and it's in between the town centre and the main road, the A127 that goes to London. So if you're coming into the town, one of the first things you'll see is Southend United, is the ground on the right hand side as you're driving towards the city centre. I call it a town because it's only been a city for a short time, and it's quite a uniquely placed club in that there aren't any teams in Essex apart from Colchester, and the closest team to people who live in Southend, other than Southend United, is West Ham, and that's obviously in Stratford, which is 55 minutes on the train away from Southend on that same line from Southend Victoria to Prittlewell. It's another 55 minutes up to Stratford, which is where West Ham are. So really it should be capturing lots of fans, lots of people, all the way up to Basildon. And, that's half an hour drive away from Southend. So that's kind of where it has a huge orbit, theoretically, of fans, Southend. It's very uniquely placed. So the club has a lot of good, I'd say, what I'd call fundamentals in terms of its potential fan base. It's just, it needs investment badly. It badly needs, the new owners, now they've taken over, thank God, they've saved the club. if they can make that stadium family friendly for the 21st century, like, and actually like an attractive place to go to take your kids to and whatever, then the club will be in a very, very good position.
Absolutely. In terms of, I was going to ask you a little bit about the Colchester Rover, because I've got a very good mate who's a Colchester fan, and I look at the map and I obviously understand that you're both in Essex. But I was just like, you're not really that close to it. You're not really that close to each other. And no. I guess it's the proximity within the leagues as well, as you've tended to mirror them, that generates that rivalry. But like geographically, they should be, they should be focused on Ipswich. And you're right, you should be focused on London. And I guess maybe it's the time that you were growing up. Certainly, we're in the Premier League era for you. There's a lot of football on TV, and I know yourself. You sort of got a dual fandom between Southend as maybe your most local club, and you've gravitated towards Arsenal. But do you feel a lot of people in that area are either people who are maybe moving out from London into making it into more of a sort of commuter town, I guess. But yeah, how does that? Is that duality or dual fan identity something that's very common in the area and people are quite comfortable with?
I think it is actually, yeah. I think a lot of people see Southend as their kind of home local team that they have an affinity with because it's Southend, and they'll go and watch Southend United and still have a Premier League team. And I mean, Southend were in League Two for a long time, and so it was something that we felt it was almost like a weekly pilgrimage going to watch Southend. You sort of become part of your sense of duty to support the local team. My dad is Maltese, so he's not from, obviously he wasn't born in England, and but he did support Arsenal growing up. That was why I support Arsenal. It's because he, when he came to England, he took me to Southend. It was like the local team. Like he said, I'll go and watch a match when I'm 6. And I enjoyed it. It's great. It's great having a local team on your doorstep that is like a good club that for many years, and that was the case. And I hope Southend gets back to that soon. But it was a very, very good club, good football, had some really, really good players. Like in that era where sort of that 2004, 2005 era, where you had like Freddie Eastwood and Mark Gower and Adam Barrett. Like there's some really, really excellent players. Sean Gota as well. When they're in League One, they signed and they got Sean Gota playing up front with Freddie Eastwood, and then they won the league and then they went into the Championship the season after, having been promoted from League Two. So there's been some really amazing times there, and like some of the and you can't help but get sucked into that as a local person. I remember when we were in League Two and going and Freddie Eastwood's debut season, and we were playing. I think it's either the debut season or the season after. We were playing Swansea at home, and it was a sellout. And I just remember like all of the Swansea fans in the away end. Just the atmosphere was unbelievable, and the whole ground was like shaking. It's like the tension in the ground was unbelievable. I think Trundle scored, Lee Trundle, and Swansea won 1-0, and it meant that we ended up having to go through the playoffs to get promoted. But to get an indication of how like that just the magnitude of that game, and how the stadium was just such a good venue for it. When a stadium is full, it changes the entire dynamics of it, right? And like a stadium like Roots Hall, if it's packed, the atmosphere is incredible. And to get an indication of how big a club Southend could be, just see how many people we used to take to like the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff for like the LDV Vans Football League trophy, or the playoff finals. And like I think the first time we were in the LDV Vans trophy and we went to Millennium Stadium, I think we took like 25,000 people, right? So it's a sleeping giant, Southend United, and that feeling where you've got, it's a bit like, I don't know if you've seen Welcome to Wrexham, where you've got the entire town like kind of rooting for the team and getting behind the team and getting sucked into that, and it becoming like very much part of the cultural fabric of an area. We had those moments in Southend United, and I guess I had an affinity with them as well, because I was in their academy for a bit, so I got to play on the pitch when I was in their academy, which was pretty cool.
No, that is nice. Getting onto a pitch, of someone you support. I didn't do it football. I managed to do it through cricket and rugby, but that feeling as a kid of being there, and that must have been amazing. I remember Freddie Eastwood. He was sort of big when I was wasting my Saturdays watching Sky Sports News and Soccer Saturday and all. You would all, Southend and Jeff Stelling would throw to whoever, or I don't know if it's too early for Bianca Westwood or whoever would have been down that way, and it'd be like, and Freddie Eastwood has scored again, and it was there's something special for a lower league club when you've got a player who's a little bit too good for you, and it's just like, can the club keep up with the player, or is the player going to sort of outstrip you? I remember sort of Simon Cox at Swindon, or maybe.
So Simon Cox played for Southend as well. Simon Cox, but fairly recently, yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like Freddie Eastwood, it was the same era where Thierry Henry was at Arsenal, and for me it was brilliant because I had this I did go and watch Arsenal as well when I could get tickets, because obviously it was around that time, it was like the Invincibles, it was like peak Arsenal. And I had the privileged position of having this two talismanic strikers, two teams that I was following, where Henry would get 30 goals a season and Eastwood would get 30 goals a season. And it was like, oh, this is fantastic. And he was brilliant. And it was a very unique situation where he's a traveller. So, he didn't have these big aspirations to. I mean, eventually he did go and play for Coventry, obviously when Southend got relegated, but he didn't have this big, I'd say, aspirations where he was totally career minded. He was very, very simple guy who enjoyed his life as it was. He was obviously an elite footballer, and we were just very lucky to have him, and Steve Tilson got him from Grays, of all places, which was non-league. So, I mean, how do you find someone like that? It's someone like that who people turn up to watch. They turn up to see him because he's just that good. And, he made that stadium just his playground. It's awesome.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about the stadium, because I've got to be true to the format. And so when you were going, and maybe it changed over the years, where were you standing, or were you sitting? It's a stadium with four stands. You've got the main stand, which is the east stand. You've got the sort of behind the goal. I'm guessing sort of where the most rowdy home fans are in the south stand, which is a two-tiered two-tiered stand, a little bit similar to Loftus Road, which is where you get that atmosphere and that kind of feeling of closeness to the pitch, and you've also got the West Stand, which was I don't know, let's talk about it now, which was unfortunately renamed the Gilbert and Rose West Stand for about 4 hours until they realised that it was perhaps not the best thing to do to have the Rose West Stand. I don't know how anyone does. I mean, we work in comms, or at least have, I don't know how anyone doesn't flag that. But, so where in the ground were you, and did that change?
So initially, when I went with my dad, I used to sit in the east stand just behind the dugout, which was a nice spot when I was growing up. And then when I was a bit older, I used to sit in the west stand in Block V, which is right near the away fans, right? So rowdy kid, me, right? Just going where
I've just immediately clocked that. Yeah, you're gonna be there. Give Block V being appropriate, because that's probably what you're doing, isn't it?
And that was all standing, right, unofficially. And then when I was a bit older in sixth form, I was sitting in the south stand, upper tier. And obviously the north bank, the north stand is where the away fans sit. So I was south upper tier when with my school friends, and I mean that's another nice thing, right? Like we all support Premier League teams, and it's like meh, 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 moaning at each other and bantering and all that stuff. But if you all support the same team with all your mates, it's great. That's a great feeling, right? So that I miss that as well. And I was sitting there south upper when Eastwood scored a free kick against Man United, and we won 1-0 in the League Cup. I don't know if you remember that, but you had Rooney and Ronaldo playing, and that was at Roots Hall, right? So you had Rooney and Ronaldo playing. I think Kuszczak was in goal, but they had like a really strong team out, and Eastwood, unbelievable free kick. So we had a really good view of that. Darryl Flahaven was in goal for Southend. He had an unbelievable game. And then we had players like Jamal Campbell-Rice, who was playing on the wing. He was great. I think Luke Guttridge was playing in the middle. Kevin Mayer, who's now the manager. It was a fantastic night, and there was a pitch invasion, and that's always good fun. And I got on the pitch as well when we won League One, and you had... So I've been on the pitch a couple of times. One to play at half time, one when we won the league, one when we beat Man United. And when we won the league, it's a kind of really memorable moment where everyone was sort of congregated outside where the dugout is, and Sean Goater was on the mic, and he was sort of going, like leading the chants, like love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, which was like a Soccer AM thing at the time, like this whole like it was absolutely pumping. It was a great experience.
That's the feeling when you get to I mean the other time obviously that you get to do that is when you stay up on the last day and you kind of everyone goes and swarms. But that sort of I mean it looks chaotic, but it's one of the best things, isn't it? Just being there, and the players drop that veneer of professionalism, or like the media management. It's just like, yes, get in. I'm just looking at that Man United team: Wayne Rooney, Patrice Evra, Alan Smith, Darren Fletcher, Ronaldo, Mikel Silvestre, Wes Brown, John O'Shea, Gabriel Heinze. I mean, that is. I mean, I'm sure. I know it's not first, but. God, how did you beat them? How?
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
You've got. I mean, I suppose you had Gary Hooper, who went on to. I presume that's on his way up before he goes up to Celtic. You've got one of the Sodgy brothers playing. You've got what must have been a 40-year-old Spencer Pryor at that point. Frank Moose's on the bench. Oh, I loved
Effie Sodgy. Effie Sodgy was amazing. He used to play with a Nigerian bandana. Yeah, fantastic player.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, obviously there's some other issues with the Sodgies as well that have come to light, as with a lot of people. But in terms of as players and when they were coming through, I mean, some at Margate as well. I've got a friend who's a really big sort of Margate fan, and so the Sodgies have also they've followed me everywhere. So they're good.
All right.
I mean, that is a. That's a fantastic memory, and when you get those little cup sets or cup upsets, to stop being weird. It's it didn't need a portmanteau. It really didn't.
I've never heard that one. No.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I was about to blame it on being an Americanism, but it obviously isn't, because they don't even have cup competitions. I don't know why I've done it, but I just you can hold on to those things, and we. I mean, I'm a Birmingham fan, so I've got Southend to thank for us getting Barry Fry. In that grand scheme of things when he was one of your managers, but we still hold on to the League Cup win against Arsenal. That's our big thing for this bleeding millennium, really. Certainly of the last decade and a half. those are such great unifying moments as fans, and when you can be there, and why I love. I mean, I know I'm talking about that's the final, but the League Cup is particularly like, and you get semi-final. Having that ability to have a semi-final at home and all that kind of stuff is great. I want to just go on to, obviously, so what's been happening, because Southend are in National League at the moment, relegated from the Football League, I think a couple of years ago, but it's sort of on the up. You've got new owners. The threat to Roots Hall, which for a long time was being threatened to be sort of closed and sold up for development, and Sainsbury's had planning permission on the site, has gone because the guy who was the chairman and owner of Southend for years, Ron Martin, has finally sort of sold up and moved on. How much? I'm guessing relief was an overriding feeling when that happened. But how much did the fan base want to stay at Roots Hall, basically?
Well, I think it's important to recognise that the fan base were quite happy to move to Fossett's Farm, because they were thinking for a long time, particularly when we're in the Championship, we need a bigger ground. Let's get a new state-of-the-art stadium that can be expanded and, it's fit for the future and it's family-friendly and all that stuff. So I think that there was no let's keep the club at Roots Hall sort of movement, really. But what ended up happening was we'd sold the ground to Sainsbury's. We were renting it off them and we were basically behind on the rent. And we hadn't built the new ground. So it was like, where's the club going to play? And then obviously they were hit with a series of winding up orders by HMRC. There was just a lot of mismanagement. And Ron Martin, I think, wanted to... he's the previous owner. He wanted a housing development to be part of the new stadium construction, to part of that site. And I'm not sure how things manifested when he sold the club or relinquished control of it. I'm not sure whether that had to be compromised on, but my understanding is that he got away, relatively unscathed and in a reasonably strong position. But the new owners have committed to keeping the club at Roots Hall, to renovating the ground, which is in dire need of renovation. I just think it's difficult for me to explain. I'm not. It's you have to see it to understand what I mean. It's very old fashioned. It's very you go in and you're very close to the pitch, which is good, I think. There are lots of pillars in the way. It's not unrestricted view. There's sort of this like tin curved roof over the stands. It's like it's not tin, but it looks like it. It's like it looks like it's been constructed, thrown together, it's just not. It's just not fit for purpose, really. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't have amazing memories of the ground and the performances on the pitch, and you feel like you're at a football stadium. For me, that, my first ever experience of football is going to Roots Hall. That will always be how I imagine, going to the football. But the club is it's not reaching its potential as a result of that, in my view. I think that's the first thing that the new owners have to do.
You wouldn't be averse to having some nice toilets, is what you're saying. And
yeah, some nice toilets, some food options, some seats that aren't, that function as proper seats where you want to sit down, just generally kind of more comfortable, unrestricted view. There's lots that could be done to improve it. Yeah. It's a great site, though, as you said. It's a good position for it. If it did move to the Fossett's Farm site, it wouldn't be near a station, really. And I don't know how they would, how they would
'Cause
navigate that.
I don't know. I don't know if it's even a cautionary tale because it'd be. I guess it's sort of wrong for me to sort of spec, but it's sort of like what happened with Colchester and going from Layer Road to the community stadium that they've got there. There's, that's right off the A. Oh God, I don't know what, but it's literally right. Whatever you can. But public transport there is not great. The facilities are better, and Layer Road was completely run down, but it's. Yeah, you've got that trade-off between kind of accessibility and lineage and history and things like that. So I guess it's a hard call to make.
A good analogy as well is Northampton ground, where when they moved to the new ground, like quite about 15, 20 years ago, maybe just under 20 years ago. Yeah. And then they sort of moved to this like complex. It was a bit like, you had like a Burger King and a cinema and like a bunch of other stuff there, but there was no infrastructure to get I think we got a coach to the ground, and like there was no, and it was just very open and it felt a bit soulless. It felt a bit, yeah. So I think that I really like Everton's new ground that they're building. I think that retains a lot of the infrastructure links and the character of Goodison Park and like the way that they've done it. I feel like with a lot of these grounds, particularly lower league grounds, they're just very soulless. And I think just because like it's a new style, but also it's not very big. So it's like, it just feels like you don't really, there's not much character to it.
And you almost have to be getting into these sort of mega projects like Everton, like Tottenham, like what they're trying to do with the new stadiums in Milan, for the architects for the budget to be big enough for them to put in the sort of flourishes that make it feel unique, and rather than a kind of you've got stadium option A or stadium option B, and which one of these two are you going to have? Yeah, Northampton's interesting. My auntie actually lived and moved to the new housing estate that was like plonked next to the football stadium. So when we'd visit them for Christmas, so we went down one Boxing Day, I ended up watching Northampton versus Torquay, because it was on, and I've seen that over time, sort of the area sort of fill in, and the town has sort of 20 years after they built the stadium, but the town has sort of now expanded towards where those facilities and amenities are. So it depends on obviously when you went, but it's and they've had some good news recently because they've finally agreed to finish building their fourth stand, which has laid empty for about almost 10 years after an issue with a construction company going bust and taking their money and running. So good times for Northampton. But as I mentioned in my introduction before this, you are a gambling campaigner. It's working for a campaign to clean up gambling, and people might recognise you or your voice from the fantastic documentary that Paul Merson did. Was that a Panorama or was it just a BBC thing? I can't remember, but it was certainly on the BBC.
Yeah, it's a BBC thing. Paul Merson, Gambling, Football and Me. Yeah.
The relationship between football and gambling, sort of where is it, and how would you like to see it evolve?
Where is it? So I think gambling is, or betting, sports betting is very much integral to customer acquisition for the industry, and I think that it's usually the gateway into gambling for a lot of people. Like that's usually the first thing they do is bet on their team. So I think it's extremely important for the industry to have that visibility. So when people do bet on their teams, they bet with a particular brand, and they're inclined to in the first instance. And once they've signed up to bet on football or whatever, then they'll be cross-sold the more addictive content and products like slots and online casino content, which is where the harm really takes place. So you have this kind of really interesting dynamic where like the majority of the revenues are coming from online slots, but the advertising is all around football. So, you don't see advertising around slot, apart from maybe on like streaming sites, but fundamentally, the visibility is not there compared to football, but the revenue's coming from somewhere else. So you have this really, I think, it's an interesting commercial model where football is almost like, because of the popularity of football, you have an affinity with their teams. They feel like they understand and they know their teams. They can predict what's going to happen. That is the way in. That's the way they acquire customers. And very often, you have such an array of bets and different types of things you can wager on, different events in the game, different random events in the game, really, like what time of the first throw in or something, right? That you make the sport as a result of that very susceptible to match fixing. So if you permit the offering of such a broad range of options to bet on, different things to bet on, and lots of those things are fixable by one person. So how many yellow cards is X player going to get? Then you're creating a sports integrity risk that doesn't need to be there. So I've never thought like people shouldn't be able to bet on football, but I think that the issue is just the prevalence of it and the amount of promotion, and also the business model that tries to entice people into betting on certain things related to the game that aren't really kind of informed decisions. They're very random, and then cross-selling the more addictive content that is obviously very random, like slots.
Yeah, it's really interesting around sports integrity that cricket had this issue with spot fixing going back into the early noughties. You could see it very easily. NBA have had their issues with spot fixing. College basketball the same. You can see this becoming a big issue, particularly with the range of leagues that you're able to bet on. The people who are making money out of, who could potentially make money out of sports betting are going to be making far more money than the players in some of these in some of these things. And I think there's a big question on sports integrity there. Obviously, I'm interested. I don't think you know this. Maybe you do. Maybe when we've talked online before. But I'm the son of a bookmaker. In terms of my dad was not like an on-track bookie. He worked for Ladbrokes and Hills, and he had a betting shop. So when I was younger, I would be in the back of the betting shop, after school, because they didn't have any childcare. It's just like keep out of sight sort of thing. And so I've been kind of cognizant of like sort of football, the way that gambling discussion around football has changed and really accelerated in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. I find that a lot of the half-time discussion when you go to the football is about your accumulators and your cash outs now. Rather than it's not what's the scores, who's playing well, is am I up with my bet or not? And it's an interesting dynamic, like you said, I don't think people should be prohibited from betting on the football, but it's about keeping that perspective, isn't it? It's about how important is betting to football and how important is football to betting.
Yeah, exactly. So really, betting or betting firms, I think, want to attach themselves to the affinity that fans have for the club. They want to sort of piggyback on that and some of that goodwill, and hope that it transfers to the brand, the betting brand. So that's, I think, that's logical from their perspective. I think they also want to try to harness some of people's love for the game and channel that into love for betting. So if you feel really like aroused by your team, to try to like become that involved and that kind of motivated or or stirred by betting as well, right? So like there's a bit of association going on, is what I'm trying to say. The range of bets and the options of things to bet on are just to broaden the net as wide as possible. The shame of it is that if you do, as a betting operator, reduce a beautiful sport into a series of random events to wager on, then you undermine that very, that very thing that you're trying to emulate with your marketing and your association with football, because people will start to fall out of love with the sport itself because they'll just see it as a way of, betting, a betting opportunity. And that would be a real shame if that happened, if the culture continued to go down this path. But anyway, that's just a risk. I mean, I think lots of people say it when they get addicted to gambling. They've fallen out of love with football because of gambling. It's a shame, right?
People are more interested in their sort of both sides to score bet rather than is their team going to win, and it's and that's that's just me. I'm not a big gambler. But I am sort of interested in your sort of experience with it, and obviously the work that you've kind of done there, which I think is really interesting because it's moving on to sort of the political stuff. It's quite cross party. Some of the stuff it doesn't fit into your traditional sort of Labour conservative sort of lines, and I know you've done a lot of work with people like Tracy Crouch, who's pushing for an independent regulator for football, and I think all of these issues are sort of linked. So I did want to a little bit touch on football and politics, and I've got one question for you, and I think maybe it's the same answer that you gave for the betting companies, but like, why are politicians so desperate? And for people who don't know, Matt worked as a sort of recovering political advisor, who worked at on the front line with the Labour Party in some of their sort of factional warfare of the mid what decade do we call it? I don't even know. Sort of this. Well, in the Corbyn era, why are politicians so desperate to associate themselves with football?
It's a good question. I think it's hugely popular. It's so popular. It's so I can't think of anything that's more culturally pervasive than football. Like, it's just a massive thing, and we're good at it. Like, this country. I mean, I think the Premier League gets some things wrong, but it's a good product, right? If you want to look at it like that, really good, pure, like, commercial, like, prism. But actually, it's like I'd say it's so, like, it drags so many people into its orbit. It's like a real, I don't know, lightning rod, I'd say, the Premier League. So you can't ignore it.
Like a soft power thing.
Totally, yeah, totally, and it is the best league in the world. It's the Super League, really, and the pyramid, the football pyramid, the clubs like Southend United and all the other clubs that are in all the other constituencies in the country that MPs represent benefits from the Premier League and the popularity of the Premier League and the revenues from that filtering down into the lower leagues. Now, there could be more, could be better, but it's certainly a country where if you are a National League player, not even in if you're a non-league footballer, you can make a living. I mean, that's a very unusual situation, right? That's something we shouldn't take for granted in this country. Is that, like, that's not the case in Italy? I think even in Serie B, there's part-timers, right? So, like, that's the reality. Is like, we have a very, very good system in this country that means that you can be a professional footballer even if you're in the 5th or 6th tier. I mean, that's quite extraordinary.
No, the pyramid is something to be defended and praised, really, and it's the problems. A lot of the problems with football have come in the last 30 odd years, where the pyramid has become much steeper rather than more gradual. And I just, it's it's an interesting thing. I don't know. Maybe it's probably because there was a question about this on Only Connect. I don't know. I don't know if you're a fan, but possibly not. But
I've seen it.
it's quite a niche. But it got me thinking. Like, I don't believe that Liz Truss is a Norwich fan. I don't really believe Rishi Sunak is a Southampton fan. I don't really believe that Tony Blair's a Newcastle fan. I don't know. It's this almost like cultural shorthand to say like we're on your side. I think, and yeah. So what I really want to know, and I hope the answer is yes, because was Jeremy really an Arsenal fan?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean this is the thing. Look, the thing about Jeremy, right, is and it's is you. I would have quite liked him to have done a few more stunts, but that's just not him. He everything he did was authentic. So getting him to do a stunt would have been impossible. He's an Arsenal fan. He goes to a lot of games. It's similar to Andy Burnham. You think like Andy Burnham is an Everton fan. There's an authenticity there, right? Like no one questions it. But like David Cameron, who couldn't decide whether he was a Villa fan or a West Ham fan. You just think like really they're better off just not having an opinion or having a team because. And if you do it inauthentically, it's like worse than just saying, you know what, I like football, but I don't have a team. Who cares?
Yeah, and it's not traditional, but I think there are more people in that boat. But it's just no one just goes, I just like rugby. It's not. They're just not. It feels like they're just not allowed to say I like rugby. They feel like they have to have. Although weirdly, I think probably the most inauthentic politician. Of the last 20 or 30 years, Boris Johnson, he's probably the only one who didn't really come into this, and no one really tried to pin him down on what football team he supported. Maybe because no one would believe the answer that he gave. But yeah, that's. But yeah, no, this is. It's been a lovely chat, Matt. It's nice to catch up with you. Good to look at one of the smaller grounds in like I say in the National League because of the importance of the pyramid, and I think it's one of the great things about grounds is their potential to be sort of centre for community, and that can be a large community or a small community, but they're equally important. And as places that people can come together and celebrate and sometimes grieve, I think they're I think they're fantastic community assets. And I've really enjoyed talking about Southend and Roots Hall with you.
Likewise, thank you, James.
Really fun discussion there with Matt about Roots Hall and Southend United, bringing back some great memories of the Freddie Eastwood era, and then some important discussion at the end around the role of gambling in football, and some less important discussion on my cynicism of politicians and their football team. Although, that being said, when I was at Rafe Rovers, there was evidence of Gordon Brown being involved there. So I guess it depends on the politician. That's all for this week. Next week, I very much hope, and it's fingers crossed because it's not recorded yet, but I very much hope that we can bring you an episode on Ibrox. Until next time.